hope that you are well and also hope that you are having a good day so far. Today we'll be doing our grade 6 English lesson on adjectives. And before we continue with our lesson on adjectives, we're going to log into aplusstudents.ca with our username as well as our password. And then we're going to select the subject of language arts, grade 6. And then we're going to scroll down up until we get to the chapter of adjectives. So our chapter is adjectives. The subject is English language arts, grade 6. And the lessons that we are focusing on is to identify adjectives. And an adjective, it's a word that describes or modifies a noun or even a pronoun. So an adjective, once again, it is a word that describes or even modifies a noun or even a pronoun. And if we look at an example, so the faded brown belt hung over the back of the chair. So the faded brown belt hung over the back of the chair. And if we were to identify the adjectives, right, then we can either say it is the brown belt or we can say the faded brown belt. Because that is basically describing the noun, which is the belt. Another example is Robbie carried several books to the attic. So if we were to identify our adjective, then we would say, how many books did Robbie carry? Then we can say he carried several books. So instead of giving a specific number, we can just say it's several books. And an adjective can also appear before or after a word that it modifies. For example, Neil planted the fragile seedlings tenderly. And the seedlings were fragile. So we can either identify it as seedlings, fragile, as well as tenderly. So which means that we have two. One is in front of and one is behind or after. And an adjective, right? All right, so an adjective, I'm going to start again. So an adjective is a word that describes or it modifies a noun or a pronoun, right? Um, for example, if I can give you an example other than the one that we have over here. Um, let's say you have a let's say you have an iPhone, right? So now if you want to describe the iPhone, we can say it is either big and black, right? So which means that your iPhone is big, but it's also black. So which means that we're going to use words like you'll use words to describe your noun or describe the noun. The same with if you were to have on a let's say a jean, a blue jean. Now, if, for example, say you have a faded blue jean, then it means that it is not just the adjective is not just describing it and saying you have a blue jeans, but you are describing your jean by saying it is faded, it's a faded blue jean or a ripped blue jean. You understand? So that is how we can describe or we can modify either a noun or a pronoun. And we call that an adjective. So adjective it describes the nouns, or let's say it modifies the nouns. And also adjectives they can tell you what kind and they can also tell you how many. Meaning if we look at the sentence, right? The sentence is the faded brown belt hung over the back of the chair, right? So the word faded and brown, that is our adjective. But it's our adjective that asks us what kind. So it's almost like asking what kind of belt hung over the back of the chair. And now we can say it is a faded brown belt. So that is how it describes the belt or it modifies the belt. And then we have another example that says Robbie carried several books to the attic. And if we look at the word several, right? Several is also our adjective, right? Which describes our noun, which is books. And several, it tells us how many books. So basically, when it comes to having adjectives or doing adjectives, in adjectives, well, we can basically find out more about adjectives by asking questions like what kind of noun or how many. And then it will describe, it doesn't have to give a number specifically, but if we look at this word several, right? Robbie carried several books to the attic. So instead of saying Robbie carried 10 books to the attic, they're saying several books to the attic, which means that it still explains or still gives the answer of how many books were sent to the attic. So we can just say it's several books. The same example that we made about the blue faded jean If you ask what kind of jean, they will tell you it's a blue faded jean. Do we understand, or do I have to explain some more? And then also adjectives that come after the word that they describes are usually connected by either a linking verb like to be, to seem, to appear, or to look. For example, he seemed eager. He seemed eager for the mail to arrive. So he seemed eager for the mail to arrive, meaning that it links or it's connected by a linking verb. So to arrive is our linking verb. So these are our adjectives, right? And we are doing our chapter adjectives. We're doing it in our tutorial page, which is aplusstudents.ca. So that is where we're going to be doing our tutorial as well as our test on aplusstudents.ca. And once again, our chapter is adjectives. So now we're going to identify adjectives by going to our tutorial lesson. All right, so just once again, we have our explanation of our adjectives or what an adjective is. And we said that an adjective is a word that describes or modifies a noun or describes and modifies a pronoun, right? And we made an example of the faded brown belt hung over the back of the chair. And the way we either describe or modify the noun, this is our noun in circle. And if we like let's say if we describe our noun and then we say it is a faded brown belt. So it's not just a brown belt, it's not just a faded belt, but it's a faded brown belt. Right? So it basically describes the belt. It tells us more about the belt, or tells us more about what kind of belt, or it modifies the belt. And in this case, it's saying faded brown belt. It's like asking what kind of belt. So with adjectives also, right? With adjectives, you need to ask the question, what kind? And you need to ask the question, how many? And then the next Example is Robbie carried several books to the attic. And the word circled is our noun. And then several. It's like, how many books did Robbie carry to the attic? He carried several books. And like I say, instead of saying he carried 5 books, 10 books, 20 books, 2 books, we can just say carried several books. Or he carried lots of books, right? So that basically tells us how many. So, as much as an adjective is a word that describes or modifies a noun or pronoun, right? With adjectives, you need to ask yourself questions like what kind of something is it and how many of whatever is it. All right. And an adjective can also appear before or it can appear after a word that it modifies, right? For example, Neil planted the fragile seedlings tenderly. So, meaning that the seedlings, right, can be described as it being fragile. And that word is in front of a noun. Or you can have it after the noun, which is the seedlings were fragile. But as you can see, it's like the sentence and the wording has changed. All right. So now we're asking ourselves questions. It says we need to select the two adjectives, right? And also, when it comes to adjectives, do not select any articles like a, an, or the, because we are describing the noun or modifying the noun, right? So select two adjectives and don't select any articles. Don't select a, don't select an, and don't select the. We took an educational trip to Monticello or Monticello, a historical landmark that was once home to Thomas Jefferson. So we need to select the two adjectives, right, that describes or modifies an adjective. All right. If we look and try to identify, let's say, our adjectives, right, within the sentence of we took an educational trip to the Monticello, a historical landmark that was once home to Thomas Jefferson. So we need to select three adjectives, right? And before we select three adjectives on our previous one, we have selected educational and we've also selected historic. Now the next one says we need to select three adjectives, right? And don't forget that we should not select articles such as a, and, in the. As I bit into the warm, gooey brownie, I longed for a tall glass of milk, right? So basically, there's two nouns within the sentence, right? And the first one that is going to be described is the brownie. So we're first going to describe the brownie, which is warm and gooey. That is already the two adjectives. The other one is glass. So tall is our adjectives. Tall describes how tall the glass is, and warm, gooey, it shows or describes the brownie, right? And then lastly, we have the two adjectives, right, that we need to select. Remember not to select a, and, or the, which are articles. Mike started walking those dogs as a part-time job, so he could afford to buy a used car. So Mike started walking the dogs as a part-time job so that he could afford to buy a used car. All right. So now we need to find our adjectives within the third one, where we said that we need to select two adjectives, right? And if we select the two adjectives, we're going to select the first one as the job is the noun, but we're going to have a part-time job. That is the first one. And then car is the other one, but used car is the adjective. It describes the noun. Right? So part-time job and used car. Those are adjectives. All right. So now let's go to our test where we're going to identify adjectives. So we're going to select three adjectives, right? And don't select any articles such as a and or the. So if we select the three adjectives, it says Kathleen just started a new business selling series of handbags, cards that feature illustrations of famous cities. So we need to choose the three adjectives. And we're going to choose the first one. And the reason why we're choosing the first one is because the new describes the new business. The handmade describes the handmade cards that she's advertising or making. And the famous means that she is describing the famous cities, right? So new, handmade and famous is our adjective. Well done. So we need to select two adjectives, right? And once again, do not select a and other. So two adjective. It says the candidate led a strong campaign, but the race was still cold when the polls closed. So if we select our two adjectives, we're going to choose the first option because it's strong. So we said that we chose the second option as strong and close. So we're going to select the two adjectives once again. So even though the day was hazy and cool, so we need to choose two. And if we choose two, we will say it was hazy and cool because hazy and cool it describes the day. So we need to select the two adjectives. So we already said that hazy and cool, it describes the day, right? It tells us more about the day. So we need to select two adjectives, and remember, do not select articles a and the. Rebecca is sympathetic and a great listener, so I usually turn to her when I have problems. And we say Rebecca is sympathetic and a great listener, so I usually turn to her when I have problems. So we need to select two, right? And we say Rebecca is sympathetic and a great listener, so I usually turn to her. All right, so we're saying option one. So option one is because we are describing Rebecca as being sympathetic, right? And also we are describing the listening as it being great. I'm a great listener. And option one is correct. So well done. Option one is correct. Here we again need to select two adjectives where we say Mike started walking dogs as a part time job so that he could afford to buy a used car. All right. So if we select the two adjectives over here, then we'll go with part time and we go with used, meaning that part time describes the job that he has and used describe the car that he has. So part time and used, which is the first option. So we need to select three adjectives now. Three. Two bulldozers have been sitting in the empty lot by the mall for several weeks. So we'll say that we need to select three adjectives, right? It says two bulldozers, sorry, have been sitting in an empty lot by the mall for several weeks. So we need to select three adjectives. So we're going to select two is our first one. So how many bulldozers? We have two bulldozers. Empty lot. What kind of lot? It's an empty lot. And several weeks. How many weeks? Several weeks. So we'll go with our first one. So we said it's two bulldozers. So two being our adjective, empty lot, so empty being our adjective, as well as several for several weeks. So two, empty, and several. So well done. So we need to select three adjectives, right? And once again, do not select the articles, which is a, an, and the. Florence was excited to make a sari from the colorful silk fabric that she'd bought in India. And if we select the three adjectives, and then we have here by colorful and fabric. So the three adjectives, right, that we were to select is Florence was excited. So excited, it describes Florence's mood to make a sari from the colorful silk. What kind of silk? It was this colorful silk. So now we must select the three adjectives and we select the first one, excited, colorful silk. And if we select our three, it's excited, colorful, and silk. All right. So we need to select two adjectives, right? We took an educational trip to Monticello, a historical landmark that was once called Thomas Frederick. Is that Frederick Jefferson? And if were to select the two, we will go with, we'll say that it is the trip was educational and the landmark that we saw was historical. So we have educational history, historic. All right, and if we select the two adjectives, right, then we can say the breeze carried the fragrant scent of lilac through the open window. And if we select our two adjectives, then we will select fragrant as one because it describes the scent, and windows because it's telling me to talk. All right, so we're going to choose fragrant and we're going to choose open, right? All right. So we must have our adjectives, and we said adjectives, right? It describes what modifies the noun, right? So we said adjectives, it describes and modifies the nouns. So, and when it comes to adjectives, right, you can also ask yourself the question, what kind of adjective and how many adjectives. And remember, when we say how many, it doesn't have to be 1 to 100 or 1 to 1,000. It can be words like several, a lot, right? So that is also the liquid form. All right, so that is the end of our lesson on adjectives. Thank you very much, grade sixes, for joining, and you should have a good evening further. Goodbye. All right, so that is the end of our lesson. Goodbye.